everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tangent TV. My name is Joseph Lanzalata, and today I am lucky enough to have with me the amazing Rebecca Hoey. Thank you for coming on, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me, Joseph.
Well, we're very grateful. We have a lot to learn from you today, and I'm super excited to hear all of it. But to give us a bit of an introduction, I mean, I know you're a management consultant in interview selection, but there's so much more to you than that. Would you mind just giving us a bit of an intro on your background and what you'll be speaking to us about today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rebecca Hoey. I've been in recruitment for 15 years now, from agency perspective, but also on-site managing recruitment programs for a number of different companies known throughout Ireland. So with RH Consulting, it's my own business. I work with companies, recruitment agencies and universities, and also the individual about application and selection. So anything to do with the interview process. Deliver bespoke training, workshops, and I do one-to-one consulting.
Amazing.
Exciting times for me.
That's really cool. You know, a lot there, and a lot of people in that space right now, and I think that's why this is kind of so timely, and why we're doing this sort of personal branding series, because kind of everybody's trying to get themselves together and understand where they're going to fit today and where they kind of can fit in the future world. And as they may move into new jobs, may move into new workspaces. It's really important to kind of have at least the basics right. And there's a lot of things that we might be able to stack up. Now, being originally from America, I would call it a resume, but over here it's called a CV. So I understand that you have your kind of top 3 tips for building a great CV. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could just share with us maybe your top 3 tips, and then I'll see if I have any kind of questions off the back of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to CV and applications, it's probably true, and especially now as we move maybe into a more employer-led market, as in there's more candidates going for roles than there may be roles open. So as we go through that, you might find that you get between 10 to hundreds of CVs coming through for any one role. So first impressions count so much when it comes to your CV. And the way I like to say it is, if you had 17 seconds to look at your CV, what do you need to make jump out? So the first thing that we look at always is your CV hygiene. So the general hygiene would be the likes of 2 pages long. So what I want to tell you is the tips, and then also why it matters from the client's point of view. So 2 pages, you've probably heard that 100 times. Why does it even matter? Well, when you get a CV through, if you've got 5 or 6 pages of a CV, as a recruiter or somebody hiring, you start to think, okay, this is a report that they might turn in. Why is it 5 pages long? Can they deliver a succinct message? Is it concise? It's the first hint of how you're going to perform in, say, business meetings or presentations. So 2 pages is enough to get all of that experience across concisely for somebody to read. I also say about basic formats, so important. People love to put fancy things on their CVs now, pictures, formatting, boxes, tables. It looks great, but from, again, a client point of view, we use CV databases. So we have candidate management systems, and all of the CVs come in and are held on this database. The problem with those formatting issues is when you download it, it can really warp your CV. So you might have experience all over the place. Then you're relying on someone to really take the time to try and figure out exactly what it is it's saying. So unfortunately, I would say keep it simple, keep it standard, keep it on Google Docs, on PDF or on Word, and just avoid that problem that could arise. Definitely breaking it down into sections is very important. It's got to be very, very easy to see for the recruiter. So if you're scanning across for that 17 seconds, the first part of a CV that will draw the attention are your last 2 roles, okay? So my advice would be to start with your education, say college or school at the bottom. Then have the second section would be your employment history, and that would start from your oldest up to your most recent. Making sure there's no gaps within the CV anywhere, so that you're addressing any of those gaps. And then at the very top of the CV, I love looking at people's achievements, what they've done, what's different. Have they won awards, or have they done any additional training or education that supports their application? So try and break it down into those 3 sections. So the second tip then is making it obvious, making it really easy for whoever's reading your CV. And if you're going through a HR department, or if you're going through a recruiter, I mentioned they see hundreds of CVs, probably for 10, 15, 20 roles that they're recruiting for. So when you're dealing with a recruiter, they might not have the technical depth that you would with a hiring manager, okay? And nor would you expect them to. So they have some keywords that they're looking for, and they're scanning through that document. And as soon as they see those, yep, you're suitable, they'll pass you on to the hiring manager. So making it really easy, making sure the words jump off the page using bullet points. Review roles online, I find, is really helpful. So if you were going for a programmer role, you'd take maybe 5 or 6 programmer roles and then have a look for the key responsibilities, the key requirements, and just make sure that they're littered throughout your CV. And also, I would say to have 3 CVs ready to go. The reason being, one CV does not fit all. I would say for a program manager, you might have very specific experience, and that would be perfect for a program manager role. But if you decided to diversify into maybe relationship management, you might want to highlight that more and make it stronger on your CV. And then likewise, if you're going technical, you might want to go into sort of more the business analyst side of your CV. So 3 CVs is probably maximum, but very helpful if you're applying for different types of roles. And then the final tip then for making it obvious for the recruiter is those keywords. Okay, so we're looking for particular search engine optimization that comes through. When we download things onto our database, we also have a CV parsing, and that means that if we type in certain words, we expect certain CVs to come up to us. So if you have those again throughout your CV, you're going to turn up in more searches. So that could mean that you'd be suitable for other roles down the line. And then my final tip is your application questions and cover notes. Probably the worst part of applying for roles. And I understand it from a candidate point of view and a client point of view. Companies now are actually moving away from cover notes and CVs. And the reason for that is, and it's a great reason, we're all looking to hire diversely. We want to get a good workplace diversity in every company. So a CV can be really kind of playing towards our unconscious bias. If we see a CV and we see a name, we maybe make decisions on where they're from or sex. If we see their education, maybe how old they are. So companies are kind of moving away from the CVs and going into application forms, and it really strips all of that away and helps the managers to make decisions solely on experience. So don't just ignore the application question forms. You really have to put the effort in, unfortunately, because they can be lengthy. And it's not a case of just copying and pasting your CV over. Really try and use the application questions to enhance the experience and maybe talk about some of that stuff that you can't fit on your CV. It will help you down the line, definitely. And then we've got cover notes as well. So I actually surveyed a number of companies before I came on today, and I spoke to them a little bit about cover notes. So a lot of companies, they don't necessarily put too much time into reading those cover notes. You know, if we've got 100 CVs applying for the role, then you've got cover notes, that's 200 documents that you're looking through. So if you're going to send a cover note, make sure it's part of the documentation that you're sending. So if you're sending a Word, it's 3 pages, one with a cover note and 2 CV. That way it's all kept together. And as you pass it through to your hiring managers, they get to see the information as well. On your cover note, you need to have a little bit about why you're applying for the role. I have seen numerous cover notes that have come in when somebody's written that they're going for a job at ABC Consulting, and they've sent it to XYZ Consulting. So every time you do a cover note, make sure it's bespoke to that customer. Make sure that you talk about the job and the company. And then I would say your 3 pieces of experience that directly affect that, and maybe 3 attributes that make you right for that company. And a little bit of flattery gets you everywhere. So if you want to sort of talk a little bit about why it is that you're passionate about that company, that really resonates with employers.
Amazing. So those are the kind of like top 3 tips, but I feel there were even sub tips within the tips, which is amazing. So
I
the
could talk about this forever, Joseph.
I know it's amazing, and I love that we're like in this instance of we're just trying to condense it down to like the short, like little quick top things, and even within those, there's so much. So just to recap, the top 3 kind of tips, just as the tips, it's kind of the general hygiene, making sure everything's kind of organized, making it obvious, and then application questions and cover notes, kind of the emphasis within that. So I just had kind of like 1 or 2 questions just on some of the things that you noted. One was on the keywords element. So you mentioned that certain employers might be looking for keywords. So I found myself as the potential applicant thinking, okay, how do I get inside the head of the person who's going to be reading this and figure out what those keywords might be? So would you have any ideas? Maybe obviously you can't speak to any like every industry specifically, but if you were to approach figuring out what keywords they might want to see, how would you go about that?
So it's about the research that you put in. I would review maybe 4 or 5 online profiles of the same role that you're applying for, and just try and have a look for those common themes that are running through those profiles. It would be, say, the governing body of education that you've done. So maybe it's PMP or Six Sigma that you're looking for if you're going for a program role. So what makes you qualified? And then it would be breaking it down into, say, subsections. It would be something about the technology that you've used. So if you're going into a particular developer role, you might want to say that you've used SQL or Python. Those things that's what I'm looking for. If I type into my system a developer with Python, you're going to come up to me.
Right, okay. And I like the idea of like, obviously on the search side kind of having the ability to search CVs for those things that kind of fits into the application questions then. Is that a big driver behind kind of why the employers are using those application forms to kind of get it standardized and searchable?
Yeah. It makes it so easy for somebody if they're asking you, application forms can be very quick yes no questions, which will directly put you in or out of the running for a role, or they can be sort of boxes of text where you really need to go into detail. And that way, instead of having to look at a CV and try and decipher all of that information, it's there for you in front of you. It's a easy way.
Right, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, it makes
yeah.
sense to me because it's the person doing the hiring, and I think this is something that maybe is useful for people who are going into that interview position, which is kind of the next stage. It's like if you're going into, you need to think about it. Think about how the interviewer, how the person doing the recruitment is looking for people, and then just put yourself in the best possible position. And I think a lot of those tips that you had there are really useful for doing that. I know I might be using them. I'm very happy in tangent for anybody watching. I'm not looking for a new job right now, but in the future I can see myself using them. But when it comes to the next stage, so the next kind of area of interest here is, say you got through the application, you're through the door, you get to go in for your interview. What are your top 3 tips or categories of tips and sub tips, I'm excited to hear, for when you actually get in the door and are there for interview?
Okay. So interviews for me personally, I absolutely love interviews. I am so nosy. I love everything about them. But I think for a lot of people, it's probably a worst nightmare scenario. So if I look at the top 3 things, presentation, you've got to think about the things that you can control in an interview scenario. And presentation is definitely key. So it's an old one, but it's an important one. So how you're dressed when you're going into the interview, it's important to ask as you're confirming your details what the expectations are with dress code. I mean, if you were going for an emerging tech company or certain creative roles, you might not be expected to turn up in a 3-piece suit. But if you were doing a client relationship manager with a bank, then maybe your casual work attire is not going to be suitable. So that plays into company fit, and makes the candidates, makes the recruiters or the interviewers really start thinking about, are they a fit for our company? So don't be afraid to ask. That's not to say that you need to strip down who you are as a person. I think it's so important to bring your flair, to bring your quirks to the interview, and be that the way you dress, or be that how you are in the interview. Being on time is a huge bugbear for a lot of a lot of hiring managers and recruiters, because obviously everybody's got work they have to do, but also that we understand if things happen, and not to let that throw you off your game. Address it immediately when you get into the interview if you are late. A quote that I have used, or was told to me quite a long time ago was a Roy Keane quote that Ian Wright, and it was 5 minutes early is on time. On time is late, and then late is inexcusable. But you know, if it happens and you're going to be late, just let them know. Just set the expectations, and that's most people are very understanding. I think remotely though, as we move into this kind of an environment to do interviews, getting yourself prepared is so important, and allowing the time beforehand to do that. So maybe it's checking your equipment, knowing exactly where you're going to position yourself, you know, what your surroundings are. Doing it on the bed or doing it with laundry behind you is not going to be a good impression. Make sure you've got your connections, your sockets, you're in a good Wi-Fi area in the house. You can always get black spots. So just get in the frame, know exactly where you're going to be, and have a practice call the night before, and leave it set up for your interview the next day. I think, you know, we've all experienced it when you're rushing around trying to get technology to work and you're all flustered, and it's the worst thing that can happen before an interview. So be prepared. And the glass of water close to hand is always handy. So then my second point is what to expect. When we do interviews now, there's so many tools that we can use to do interviews. Competency-based interviews are the probably ones that you've heard of most, and that's, you know, your question and answer interview. But they could be doing all sorts of different things now. We've got video interviews, you've got scenario tests, you've got presentations. All of this information, be prepared to ask them when they're confirming the interview exactly what they're expecting of you in the interview, so that you can prepare. I always like to know how many rounds there's going to be. So again, that can mentally sort of set you in, okay, I'm not going to hear back straight away. It'll probably be 2 weeks because they're going to do a 3-round process. So you can kind of start to set your expectations around that. One of the hardest parts, I think, for a lot of people in the interviews is the small talk. And that's kind of a big piece when it's preparing and what to expect for your interview. Some people are very natural at it, and some people maybe find it the hardest part. So try and prepare a couple of topics that you're ready for. There's so many topics we can talk about at the moment, but keep it light. I mean, the weather has been fantastic. That would be one to break the ice and get you talking. I usually say a sports event, but that's not happening at the moment. But you know, what your expectations are and things is always good to get a bit of a connection going. And I think it's very important that when you connect with each member of the interview panel, you build that connection and they start to remember you. So when we're calibrating at the end of an interview, we're thinking, okay, 3 people have the right experience, but I really got on with this person, and it can sway people in your favor. And then finally, the biggest tip is to prepare. There's not too much preparation that you can do. You go through your experience from your oldest to most recent and start practicing, start saying it out loud. You know, we've highlighted all of the experience and skills that we're looking for. Get practice to say them and hit them as you talk through your CV and you progress through your career. Interviews are generally based around the role profile, so you've got a really good hint about the type of questions that they're going to be asking. So always have a look at the role profile and try and identify the competencies that they might be asking about. If you're going in for a relationship manager, they're obviously going to ask you about customer relationships. So have some experiences that you can call to mind. I find it really helpful to have maybe 4 or 5 examples that I know I can use, and I can tweak them for different questions. So what might be a customer relationship example might also be dealing with pressure or working to a deadline. So you can tweak those answers, but it just avoids that moment where you've asked a question and you've gone completely blank. And you've got to call to mind an example. Having it prepared is the best way to go. And then how you prepare it. I'm sure you've heard of the STAR approach, or if not, get familiar with it. It's the traditional competency answers: your situation, your task, your action and response. So get practicing about answering all your questions and hitting each of those topics. And that will just really help with your nerves as well. Saying it out loud, saying it to someone, recording yourself, doing it in the mirror, doing it at the bus stop. It's all about saying it and repeating it. So they would be my top 3 tips for interviews.
That's awesome. Thank you for all of the tips. And there's a lot that I kind of connected with there too. That when you mentioned dress code off the bat, I actually have like a little question on that because
Yes.
is it possible to overdress for an interview? And the reason I ask is just because of a small personal anecdote. When I first interviewed for this role in Tangent as the student entrepreneurship program manager, I came in my nicest suit. It was all black. I had my nice slick black tie, my white shirt. I dressed what I thought was really well. And now, mind you, it worked in my favor, but the first joke that was made was, "Am I coming to a funeral?" And I was like, "I hope not. I hope I get the job." And so, like, it worked and I was able to turn it. But, like, in that context, is there a possibility for overdressing for an interview? Or is it always best dress?
It's fine if it's authentic. If somebody's there in a suit, tie, and all dickied up, and they're uncomfortable, then that's the wrong thing for you to wear in that interview. It's about what you feel most comfortable in, that you can represent yourself best in. I don't think there's a way of overdressing for an interview, but there is definitely a way of making yourself feel uncomfortable, and that's a no-no.
Absolutely. No, I get that completely. And it's like I do workshops sometimes with pitching and presenting, and it's very much the same thing. So you have to make your energy match your brand kind of thing. It's like you need to be your authentic self when you come into the interview, and then kind of everything will be okay. I love the elements about, like, kind of prepare and be ready is amazing. I just had kind of one question around that. Obviously, this is not what anybody hopes for, but if you end up in that situation in the interview where you're asked that question that you just didn't see coming and it blindsides you, how might someone handle that?
Okay, yes, there's been a few, and you feel for the candidates, you really do. You can see them trying to grasp anywhere for an answer, and the silence stretches endlessly. So absolutely address it. I'd immediately say, I'm sorry, I know I have a great example for you. I can't call it to mind at the moment. Could we please revisit that at the end of the interview? Now, if you're lucky, they might forget, but it does give you that chance to really sort of take a break, take the pressure off you, and start thinking about an example. If they don't ask you that question at the end, be the one to bring you back to that. Be the one that wants to remind them. Don't just think you're going to get away with it. It's important to answer all the questions if you can.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I love that, because it's the be your authentic self. Like, if you are kind of lost and you don't have the answer, just come through and say, "Look, I know I have an example, or I can't think of it right now, but I want to answer that question really well for you. If you can turn it, I love that. That's like pivots it into kind of being your authentic self." And
Absolutely.
in the context of being your authentic self, that kind of brings us to our last kind of topic of the day. Now, I know this is kind of just the wrap up, so these are some maybe like quick fire top tips, because we're going to go into this a bunch more in some of the following series of the branding series. But in terms of personal branding, and what everybody kind of tends to think of in personal branding today is LinkedIn a lot of times. So what would be your top 3 tips for personal branding, LinkedIn profile in that space?
Okay, so LinkedIn is the tool of choice when it comes to hiring, as well as other tech sites as well. But probably the top one is actually your photo. So making sure that it's a professional photo, that it represents you how you would want to be represented to a potential customer or to a potential employer. It's not Facebook, so you don't need to be drinking pints or at the football game, but do bring a bit of your personality into things as well. It's those eye-catching ones that really sort of draw you back. Also, your education and your employment, more so your employment history. If you think LinkedIn's there to support your CV, so you can talk about things that might not be on your CV and embellish them a little bit more, go into a bit more detail on your LinkedIn profile. So definitely, when it comes to the quality of your profile, make sure that speaks to employers and customers. My second tip, which I absolutely love, and it's kind of nervy, but asking for recommendations. Again, employers will go through your LinkedIn profile and will see that you have a number of recommendations from maybe more senior qualified or well-connected individuals in your industry. And it's nice to read nice things about yourself, and it's nice to see that when you're looking at a candidate as a potential employee. So ask for your recommendations on your LinkedIn. My final tip is about connections. Using your connections, it's a fantastic hiring tool for yourself when you're looking for a new job. So always have a look at who you know in a particular company that you're going to apply for. You'll find that there's so many connections that you have that probably work in the companies that you're interested in. So maybe reach out to them if you're thinking of applying and ask them to recommend you. Companies do have referral bonuses, and HR do sort of keep a special eye on candidates that have been recommended from internal employees. So that's really important. And then within that, when you're looking to make connections, it's so important that you bring a bit of your personality to a connection. Don't just send out a standard connection request. Maybe write in there that you're interested in their company and are going to apply for a role in the future, and there's somebody that you think would make a really valuable connection in your network. And it just kind of tweaks the manager's interest, and gets them thinking, maybe having a look at your CV or maybe having a look at your LinkedIn profile, and it just maybe sets you apart a little bit from those other applicants. So they would be my 3 very quick fire.
No, absolutely, and that's amazing. It's kind of like the high level stuff, and it's really interesting for a lot of people, I'm sure. And if people are looking for kind of more depth on that, we are going to go into that in the future. I did have one kind of high level question, just for the individual who now maybe they're watching this video and understands, okay, right, I understand we're in the future. I need to have some sort of a LinkedIn profile, but I haven't updated my LinkedIn profile since I graduated, high school or graduated college. It's just kind of sitting there, and it has my photo and where I went to school. What do you see as kind of that like minimalistic, like what is the minimum viable LinkedIn profile that somebody should kind of have if they're not looking to engage as deeply but just want to tick that box?
Yeah. Okay, so definitely your education, if you're starting out in your career, and then similar to your CV, 2 employment histories if you can have them, and within that maybe 5 or 6 bullet points detailing what you've done in each of those roles. And then I think content is key. So if you're seen to be interacting with other content that is from within your industry, you'll be seen to be commenting and posting information. That's always really attractive as well. It really sort of brings that personal aspect and professional understanding of your market to the forefront. So they would be definitely things that you need to be doing.
Okay, the first things to get everybody started.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing, Rebecca. Thank you so much for all of your tips today. I know that I've gotten a lot out of it. I'm definitely bringing a few of these things into whenever my next interview comes. But if there is anything else, like, if people want to learn more or want to reach out and connect with you, I'll leave the floor to you for kind of any last few things you might want to share with people.
Yeah, so I have my LinkedIn page, hopefully up to date. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you're looking to go for a new role, or if you're looking to train your team at the moment with interviews. And also through my email as well, you can contact me, and I think that's all going to be on the links at the bottom.
It's all down below, not to worry. That's amazing. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Tangent TV. Rebecca, a big thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge with all of us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Everybody, we will look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Tangent TV. Until then, goodbye for now.